You were talking about Marlon Brando.
Yes, and you know, 60 takes was nothing for him. I mean, and it was just so wearing. I mean, he was wonderful. I mean, he loved that whole sort of unrehearsed feeling, and of course that's why he was such a good actor too. I mean, that's the way it came out. But other people would get exhausted, you know, and he would have some of the lines written on his hands or on the table or whatever, you know. But we had a good time. We had a really good time because he was happy. You know, he was very happy about doing comedy and being in a comedy, and you know, so I got to know him quite well.
Oh, we should also mention Robert Preston in The Music Man.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Well, he was so great. You know, the actual story is that Frank Sinatra, they wanted Frank Sinatra to do The Music Man because Warner Brothers was producing it. And Frank was a big star, and of course a singer, as we know, and they wanted the name value of Mr. Sinatra on the screen. And Meredith Willson, who wrote the show, The Music Man, came to Warner Brothers and said, "You do not make my movie unless you use Robert Preston." So that's how Preston got the role, you know, and I was thrilled, of course. Much as I love Sinatra, I was eager to work with Preston. And I'd seen him in the show in New York, you know, and he was great. The lovely thing about him, he had been doing the show in New York for, I think, a couple of years. It ran. And when he got on the set, it was like he was doing it for the first time. I mean, it was just, you know, everything was fresh and new and wonderful. He wasn't one of those actors who said, well, we did it this way, you know, we should do it this way. He didn't do any of that. And Morton DaCosta directed it. And Anna White, the choreographer, was our choreographer. And I remember the first day, you know, we rehearsed the numbers ahead of time, all of the numbers ahead of time, weeks ahead of time. And I remember the library, Marion the librarian, the number in the library, you know, where we do all the moves and everything. And we were rehearsing the first day of rehearsal for that number, and Anna was sitting there. And Anna was one of these people that just said it straight out like it is. I mean, she, you know, no holds barred with her, word-wise. So she said, I said, Anna, I said, I just have to tell you, I said, you know, I'm truly, really not a dancer, you know. I just not, you know, I wanted to make sure that she didn't expect me to, you know, do a tour jeté or something. And she leaned over in her chair. She said, honey, by the time we finish this movie, you'll be the best damn dancer in Hollywood. And she was right, boys. She was great. She was great. She, you know, she worked with me, and it was wonderful.
Now, you mentioned you were pregnant during the filming of that film.
Yes, I was. And I was pregnant with Patrick. And I remember, the story is, which is kind of a funny story too, I discovered I was pregnant about 3 months into filming, and it took about 6 to 8 months to, you know, to film a musical, which is what I told you about Oklahoma. They were all took a long time. I thought, oh, what am I going to do? Because this is my second child, and I had 10-pound babies, so I mean, it was not good. So I took Morton DaCosta to lunch, and I told him that I was pregnant. Well, he nearly fainted, you know, and he said, well, don't worry about it. We'll do everything we can to help you. He said, we'll build a corset. We'll keep pulling you in and pulling you in. And he said, it's a period picture, so we'll add bows and fringe and flounces and whatever to the costumes. And he said, and, you know, if need be toward the end, well, we'll just shoot you from the waist up, you know. He said, but don't tell anybody. I said, okay, I won't, you know, so. Anyway, he did as he promised, and they kept pulling me in and, you know, kept adding and so forth and so on. And toward the end of the shoot was the one and only screen kiss that we had in the movie, which was the footbridge scene, you know, where we sing the beautiful ballad, Till There Was You, and we have the only screen kiss in the movie. He takes me in his arms and everything. Well, by this time, I truly was very pregnant. I mean, you know, they had me pulled in and everything and kind of covered, but I was pregnant. During the kiss, with our eyes closed, arms around each other, all of a sudden, this big kick happened, you know. And Bob pulled back and he said, what the heck was that? I said, that was Patrick Cassidy. Well, the addendum to this story, you know, Patrick, of course, is a singer and actor now. You know, he's doing, as we speak, he's on the road doing Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But his dream in life was to meet the great Robert Preston. And they just happened to be doing a benefit in New York together. And Patrick went and he knocked on the dressing room door, and Bob opened the door and he said, "Oh, Mr. Preston, I'm so excited. I'm so happy to meet you. My name is Patrick Cassidy." With that, Bob stepped back 3 steps and he said, I know, we've already met." So that's what happened, with the pregnancy. It was really something.
You know if that piece of film still exists?
I don't know. I'm sure it does, somewhere. Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. It was very funny.
Well, let's move on and talk about the Partridge Family. How did that come
All
about for
right.
you?
Well, I was, busy doing films. I was still doing I did a lot of television movies around this time. One of my favorite, by the way, then we'll go into Partridge, was Silent Night, Lonely Night with Lloyd Bridges. It's probably my most favorite television film I've done, and maybe one of my most favorite movies that I've ever done.
Why is that?
It was such a beautiful story about these 2 people on a Christmas weekend, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And the story it was a Maxwell Anderson play that had been done in New York with Henry Fonda and Barbara Bel Geddes. And so the roles were really wonderful roles, And do you want to stop? Should we?
Okay, we're talking about Silent Night.
Oh, yeah. It was such a beautiful story, Silent Night, Lonely Night. It was about these 2 people in Amherst, Massachusetts on a holiday weekend, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And Lloyd Bridges was the lead, and his character was visiting his wife, who was in a mental institution in Amherst. And I was visiting my son, who was in college in Amherst. And I actually had just left my husband. We were having a problem. And he was having a problem, and we meet, and that's what it was about. It was about these 2 people who meet each other on a Christmas holiday, and how they get together, how they help each other, and then at the end, and fall in love, really, but then go back to their spouses. And it was such a lovely story, and I really loved doing it. And once again, I had a great director, Mr. Dan Petrie. So, and then we were talking about getting into
The
Partridge Family. Oh, but of course. Anyway, I wanted to bring that movie up because that was one of my favorites. Then the reason why I thought I just completed it, and I came back from Amherst, and that's what made me think of how the Partridge Family happened. And I was back home in California, and my sons were, in school now, and I was always on movie locations, taking them everywhere. I had taken them all over the world with me on movies. But I couldn't take them out of school. I mean, it was time that I kind of stayed home for a while because they were all 3 in school. And I got this offer to play Shirley Partridge in a thing called The Partridge Family. And I read it, and I said to myself, where is it? Is it?
Okay.
And I read the script of The Partridge Family, and I loved it. I really loved it. I just loved the idea. I loved the fact that she was the first working mother on television, The family idea and the music idea was such a great idea for me. I mean, I thought, wow, there's nothing like this on television. This is really a very different thing, So I said, you know what? I want to do this. And of course, everybody said, don't do television once again. This is not a good idea. Don't do television. And I said, no, I have a feeling the show is going to be a success. I just have it in my bones that it's going to be a hit show. And if it is, I can stay home and raise my kids. It's a half-hour show. I love the role. I love the idea. And it'll be fun for me to do, and I can be home with my kids. And so that's why I made the decision to do it, basically. And then I find out that they're thinking of David Cassidy, my stepson, for the role of Keith Partridge. And they came to me, the producer, Bob Claver, who we talked about earlier, whom I loved. And he said, Shirley, how do you feel about your stepson? And I said, why? I said, he's great. Why? And he said, well, we're thinking about him for Keith Partridge, but we want to make sure that you have a good relationship, that's not going to be. I said, no problem whatsoever. I think it's a great idea. I knew that David could sing. David had already been in a Broadway show that didn't last very long and had done some television. So I said, no, he'd be perfect, you know. So they tested and they hired him. And I remember I came on the set because I was testing with the other little children that were testing to play the other roles. And I would test with each one of them, you know, to make sure it worked out. And David was on the set and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm your mama in this." And he said, "You don't mean it." I said, "Uh-huh." So he said, "Oh my gosh, that's great." You know, nobody told him, you know, so I told him first time. And that's how that came to be. And as I predicted, the show did become a hit. I mean, the pilot was wonderful. We got along very well, and I remember, of course, Danny Bonaducci was so wonderful, and the relationship between him and Dave Madden was made in heaven. I mean, the comedy, that's where the comedy was. And it was just one of those things that really clicked right from the beginning. Danny really had respect for Dave, and Dave sort of acted like a father to him on the set. You know, he'd play ball with him and everything, and he loved that. And Danny was a natural comic. I mean, he was, at that age, he was one of the best child actors I'd ever seen, and was just wonderful in it. And we had beautiful Susan Day, who had been a model, but was really just, you know, superb for the role. It was so well cast, in other words. I mean, it couldn't have been better. And I remember after we did the pilot, everybody kind of started saying, "Well, now when are they going to write a show about me? Is the next show going to be about me? Is the next show going to be about me?" And I remember taking them all aside and saying, "Listen, guys, you know, if we're going to have a hit show, we've only done a pilot. It's got to be that we work together." I said, "There'll be stories around each one of us, you know, if the show's a success. But I said, we can't be thinking that way." I said, "because if you do, it won't be a family. And that's what it has to be. It has to be a family. And we have to work together for whatever the story is." And they did. You know, they really did.
Did you find yourself doing that a lot?
Yeah, I had to, you know, kind of be Mother Hen every now and then, you know. With Danny would, you know, kind of act up, which he did a lot. But he was so good, you know. And I was, you know, I became the disciplinarian, you know, for the little ones. And sometimes David, because David would be out, now he became a rock star. I mean, out of the show. I mean, nobody knew. The producer, Bob Claver, said, "Who knew that he could do this?" They had no idea that this was going to happen. You know, they just thought they would have a nice little band and that would be it. And of course, that was something that they were just couldn't believe, that he became the #1 rock star in America, you know. So then he was out doing concerts, you know, every weekend. I mean, we'd finish the show Friday night, late normally. He'd get on an airplane somewhere and be, you know, who knows where for concerts. And then we would have, Monday morning would be our read-through. You know, we shot, that was when wasn't 3-camera, it was just, you know, it was tape. I mean, it was film. And we shot with 1 camera, and we'd shoot 4 days a week. But we had our big reading and rehearsal on Monday. And so every once in a while, David would show up late for the Monday morning rehearsal, or you know, and keep everybody waiting. Well, I understood his problem, but I was not ready for this. I didn't, you know. So I remember a couple of times having to say to him, "I understand what you're doing, and I know it's important that you do the concerts, but the show is also important." And I said, "You cannot keep these people waiting." So he was good about it, you know, from then on.
How did fame overall affect the cast?
I think, you know, they found it fascinating that they were, you know, sought after now, and that there were a lot of fans waiting outside the studio, mostly for David, of course, you know. But they were excited about it, thrilled about it. You know, I mean, this was unexpected, and I don't think it went to anybody's head, though, if that's what you mean. And I think it's because, you know, I'm not saying that I was the reason for it, but I think that I was pretty grounded in that area, and I think that they sort of saw that, you know. And David was too, even though everything was happening to him. They again realized that we had a show to do, and so that's the way they felt about it.
Describe the character of Shirley Partridge.
Well, she was kind of like me. I mean, she was, you know, she was a working mom, but wanted her children to have values. The show business thing was secondary. And by the way, they made a point of that because the first couple of shows, the pilot in particular, and then a show or two after that, they were dealing very much with the show business angle. Where are we going to perform, and let's rehearse every day, and let's do. And finally, I remember Bob Claver coming on the set and saying, we're going to tone down the show business angle a bit on the show. We're going to now make them real people. We're going to have stories about, teenage sweethearts in school, and we're going to have stories about, Shirley maybe dating the local, one of the local guys in town. And so it's not going to be just show business. There will always be a song in the show. We'll always have one performance, but the entire show won't be built around that performance, which is what they started to do in the beginning. And I think that helped because it made us real people. It made us real people. And it also, though, gave the world outside, every teenager in America thinking that they could do this. Listen, we can go to school and we can have a band and we can get a bus, And I remember the sad part is that every once in a while, and it happened more than once, I would find some young 16-year-old, 15-year-old, 14-year-old sitting on my lawn, just got off a bus from Iowa or Michigan or someplace, and sitting on the lawn and saying, I've come to be in the Partridge Family. I want to be in your band. I can play the instrument. I can do. These were kids. They'd literally run away from home.
How'd you handle that?
So that was sad. I mean, I just had to tell them the truth and say, listen, this is a television show. This is a television show. We don't have a band. We make believe. It's all make believe, and you cannot do this. When you get old enough and you decide you want to sing and you want to dance or you want to play an instrument, you do that in your hometown first, and then and I would literally have to call their parents wherever they were and say, I have your daughter or your son. Mostly it was girls that did this. And I would have to put them on a bus or a train or whatever I had to do, or an airplane, and get them home. And that happened about 3 times during the run of the Partridge Family.
Going back to the character of Shirley Partridge, was she always named Shirley? I mean, did that come from you? Or?
Yeah, they thought about changing it. I think in the beginning, the actual script was not Shirley. It was something else. And they decided, they being, the producers, decided to change it to Partridge, which I thought was fun. I liked that, so. Yeah, no, it wasn't Shirley in the beginning. But yeah, we were a lot alike. I mean, I didn't have that many, although I had 3 and a stepson, so I had children. And some of the stories, that they would write about, the writers, every once in a while would come to my house on a weekend and spend a whole day on a Saturday or a Sunday and find out what I was doing with my own children, what the day was like. Where did they go? What did they do? What did they eat? How did they behave? And they would write stories about. I remember one story in particular that they wrote about Danny stealing from the 5 and dime store, going and stealing, and the story was about him bringing it home. And I found out that he had stolen something, and I made him go back. His parents do, go back and apologize and take it back, and and make a big apology and the whole thing, and I'll never do it again. Well, my son Patrick did that. And he did it. The story happened when the writers were in my house. He came home. I think it was just a pack of gum or something like that. But it fell out of his pocket, and he had no money. He was then just, how old was he? 6 or 7 or something, And he stole it. He'd stolen it, And I did the whole number, maybe go back and apologize and return it. I'll never steal again, that kind of thing. So they took stories like that from my own home,
Were there any other ones that you suggest that you?
I think one of them where Danny was attracted to one of the little Jodie Foster, played his girlfriend in the series. I think she did 2 or 3 shows. And I think they took a story. Patrick had a little girlfriend in his class, and he would bring her home every now and then, and so they got that kind of a story, and a couple of the show business stories where we'd sing together and rehearse together and stuff like that, because my kids loved to sing, and they all played instruments, my children. Pat played the drums, Sean played piano, Ryan, my youngest didn't, but David and Sean and Patrick all played instruments and sang.
Did you kids watch the show?
Yeah, they came on a couple of times. They did guest shots, so to speak. Yeah, they did. Sean, my oldest, was a little, by that time, I think he was about 9 or 10 or 11. And he was a little, already at that point, almost, the teenage, Mom, really? I mean, why are you doing this? I mean, Mom, I remember particularly, this is interesting, that's when we wore the short skirts and the boots. That was the period of, and of course on television we wore the velvet suits with and in the show I wore the short skirts. This was the mini skirt period with the boots. That was the style. And I remember one night David was staying with us, and I was going out to dinner with Jack or whatever, and Sean said, we were in the backyard, and I said, now, I think David was babysitting, as a matter of fact, because, I think he was staying. And Sean looked at me and he said, why do you dress that way? No other mother dresses that way. And I said, what do you mean? This is, he said, no, it's because you do that show. That's why you dress that way. And David was there, and David started to laugh and said, what are you talking about? You have a beautiful mother. She should show her legs, it was that kind of thing. So we went through a little of that, too.
How do you think the show reflected its times in the early 70s?
I think it was right on. I mean, we did a lot of issue shows, We did shows that talked about all kinds of things. I mean, and we had wonderful guest stars on the show, I mean, we had Richard Pryor, and we had, can't any number of them now. I can't think right now, but wonderful guest stars, and wonderful stories. We did a whole story in a prison. I remember we went to a real prison with real prisoners, and did a whole story. We were doing our show in a prison for the prisoners, and there was a real one, and we did a couple of stories that had real issues, as I recall. But of course, now I'm trying to think what they were. I remember with Richard Pryor and the other wonderful black actor.
Oh, Lou Gossett Jr.?
Lou Gossett, thank you. Lou Gossett Jr., yeah, they were both in the show. And wonderful. It was a wonderful show.
Was
I
it
loved
Soul
that
Club?
show. Yes, exactly. And that was kind of an issue show at the time. I mean, because we were talking about the black and white issue in the show, touched on it in any case. And it was great, it was just great. I mean, I just loved working with them. So we had a lot of things that went on, and I dated in the show. Bert Convy was my date. I remember a couple of times, the actor Bert Convy, and John McMartin, the actor John McMartin, was the date in the show, and so we had a lot of those kinds of things going, and we had a dog in the beginning. Of course, we lost the dog after the first show. They decided the dog was too much trouble, and. But it was great. We did Christmas shows, which I loved. Dean Jagger, the wonderful old character actor, was in our first Christmas show, and that was the thrill to work with him. And it was a pleasant time for me. I loved it.
Talk about working with Bernard Slade. Who was he?
Oh, yeah. Well, he was the creator, really. I mean, he was great, and he wasn't around a lot. I mean, he would show up every now and then, but I mean, he wasn't around a lot. But he was thrilled about the show. I mean, he loved the fact that we were doing it, and I met him several years later and had an opportunity. Matter of fact, we were on a cruise ship together and had an opportunity to really talk to him about the show. And he said it was one of his most favorite things that he'd ever done, and he loved the whole point of view that we all had as the characters, and he was really happy with it, so that was good.
Yeah. Also talk a little about the Cowsills and their
yeah, well, they were the
influence on
original Partridge Family, the Cowsills. That's where he got the idea, and matter of fact, he actually, if I'm right about this, I believe that Bernie had written it for the Cowsills. I'm pretty sure that he had written it for them to do, because he was a big fan. He loved them. and then discovered that they weren't actors. I mean, the group was great, but they were not actors. I mean, so that's what it came down to. And he realized that he couldn't have them do the show because they just were not actors. So that's how it happened, that we became the Partridge Family, but it was based on the Cowsills. And, I see them every now and then. Matter of fact, I went to just recently, benefit for one of them who is having he has cancer, and he's in a hospital, and his brothers and sisters gave sort of a benefit on his behalf. And I went and sang with them and, talked to them and, did a lot of reminiscing. So it was great.
And Bob Claver, talk about working with him.
Oh, he was great. I love Bob Claver. He was one of those producers that, a lot of producers, and we've all actors have worked with them, are really, really hate actors. I mean, they don't like actors. I mean, they in front of you they're nice and sweet and all that, and then behind your back, they just don't. Bob was not that at all, and he was so honest. If I would say, Bob, this line bothers me, or I may have to be a half an hour late or something, or if you're not going to use me at 6 o'clock in the morning, could I sleep an extra half hour? And I could talk to him about that. I didn't always get what I wanted, but I could talk to him. For the most part, you couldn't talk to a producer, executive producer. That's what he was. And he'd come on the set every day. It wasn't like he sat in an office and directed somebody else to do it. He was there, and he would say, listen, if it doesn't work this way, we'll do it another way. We'll do it to please all of you. We'll do what you want us to do. We'll work this out. And he was that kind of a producer. And boy, that was unique, really unique, still is unique. And therefore, I think he got the best out of all of us. He really did. And he worked with the directors. We didn't have one director. We would have different directors for every show. Now, he might hire maybe somebody to do 2 or 3 shows, but that was the most that they did. So he knew the show backwards and forwards, and he would come on and he would talk to the director, which is, again, a very unusual thing for an executive producer, to tell them what the story was about, to tell them what he wanted from the story, to tell them about who we were as actors, who we were as people, all of us. And it was great. It was a great help for everybody.
And talk about the musical aspect of the show. How did that work?
Well, we would record a new song every week. We had wonderful songwriters. David would help toward the end of the time, got into helped writing some of the songs as well, because he got very good at it. But it was only David and myself that did the recordings. All of the other voices were studio voices, because nobody else was really a singer. But of course, I didn't do very much. David was the lead singer. And I was in the background for the most part, but I was in the studio with him, and I would do the oohs and ahs and the whats and the hums and the this and that. And, as I said, in the 5 years that we did the Partridge Family, I had 3 solos. I'm not even sure it was 3. It might have been 2. The whale song was one, which I loved, about saving the whales, and we did that down in Marineland, that episode. And so he was the lead singer. I remember people saying, and some of the songs I liked, some I wasn't thrilled about. And it was called bubblegum music. It wasn't hard rock by a long shot, but it was called bubblegum. But some of them now I really appreciate more than I did then, because it was so different from the kind of singing that I did.
Let's stop there to change the tape.
Okay.